All right, welcome to another Soundminer tutorial video. This one is on Soundminer 6.1. When Soundminer 6 came out, it was a huge improvement over Soundminer 5. Lots of amazing new features, tabs, and all kinds of things. And as much as Justin threatened to retire, apparently he got bored, and we find ourselves here with Soundminer 6.1. Nothing will look drastically different when you look at it, but there are quite a few new features, some changed things, and some improvements. So in this video, I just want to walk you through them in no particular order. And if you're interested in diving more into Soundminer or Radium, I do have some tutorials for sale on the website over at sonofex.com that go very deep into Soundminer 6 and Soundminer 5 and Radium. But this video really is dedicated just to the new features in Soundminer 6.1. A couple things I'm going to mention probably were in Soundminer 6, and I either forgot to mention them or some of them were things that I wasn't even aware of at the time, and the first one is one of those. Under Preferences, under Scanning and Embedding, is this preference that says Auto Make Keywords. What this preference does is when you scan a file into Soundminer, if there's nothing in the keywords field already, then Soundminer will basically take and put the file name there. The reason you might want this is that you may not be searching file name with your search indexes, and that's a way to put the contents of file name at least into keywords. That might make you find the file easier. If you like to use keywords and you're good at putting them into your own metadata, you may want to turn this off like I do. That will prevent Soundminer from putting anything into the keywords field. Now, one thing to be aware of is that if there is something in keywords when you scan the file, Soundminer won't overwrite it with the file name. It's only if the keywords field is empty. Another preference that you might want to know about, which is new, is clear all marks on launch. If you are somebody that likes to use check marks like I do, this preference will basically tell Soundminer to clear them when you restart the program. With this preference off, these will be retained. So if I quit right now and relaunched, these would still be checked. With this preference on, if I quit and relaunch, these will all be cleared. I usually leave this preference on. Under the hammer and wrench, I think there's a couple of these that might be new. I think maybe reset pitch on selection change might have been added, so you can toggle a few more things here. But there is something here called follow playhead. I'm going to turn it off for a second to show you the way that Soundminer worked before. I'm going to zoom in on a file, and I'm going to play a little bit. And you see that when the cursor moves off the screen, the waveform here doesn't change at all. Actually, let me find a little bit of a longer file. No, that's not a very pleasant one. Let's try this one. I'm going to zoom in now, and I'm going to turn on the preference that says follow playhead, and you'll see when I hit play that Soundminer takes on a center playhead, very similar to what a lot of DAWs can do, so that as you're zoomed in, you don't sort of lose track of where the cursor is. So that's just a preference. I leave that on all the time because I find it really useful. I'm going to go to this database that has just one sound file and has no metadata to show you the next feature. That's called spelling suggestions. And I think you go to find here under General, show spelling suggestions. So Soundminer has been able to do suggestions for a while, but they've been suggestions that are limited to data that's already sort of in your database. But now for the first time, if I go to description and I want to put hippopotamus here, and for some reason I don't know how to spell it, if I just start typing hippo, what you'll see is that if I can type, you start to get these suggestions of what word it thinks you might be thinking. And if you hit return, it'll add it in. Now it doesn't add a space, you'll have to add that. But if I type hippopotamus and rhinoceros, basically you have autocomplete for spelling like you do in your phone and many computers. So that's new. I'm going to go back to this database here. I'm going to select some files, and I'm going to call up the mirror window. Now, one new thing, well, there's a few new things in Mirror. First of all, we now have access to WavePack. And WavePack is a lossless compression similar to FLAC, but it overcomes a couple of FLAC's biggest limitations. WavePack can actually store more than 8 channels. I don't know how many, but it's a lot. I think it's 32 or 64 even or something. And WavePack can work with 32-bit files, which is something that FLAC can't do. Now, at this point, there's not many things that support WavePack. Certainly Pro Tools doesn't, Isotope doesn't. I don't know about Reaper yet. So it's probably not something you want to utilize yet, but it's something to keep your eye on because it might be a great replacement for FLAC. And at the very least, if you wanted to archive certain things, 32-bit files, and gain some space back, you could use WavePack. Just be aware that you'll have to kind of play them back through Soundminer to be able to convert them back into wave probably. Mirror is actually now a floating window, so that means that before, to get back to my browser and make some new selections, I'd have to close the window. Now I don't. I can simply come over here and I can pick new files and I could remirror them, which is very handy. It basically means you can leave the mirror window up as long as you'd like. And lastly, we now have mirror presets. So I have some different presets here that I've stored just temporarily. I have one called Tim Default, and that's to mirror to FLAC by category. And this other one I made just as a demo will mirror to WavePack, but using a different sort of scheme for the structure. So this is very handy when you have different types of librarian work, or you want to convert things to different formats, or based on different folder structures, you can now basically store presets and you can delete presets. If you made some changes, you could then resave that preset. So we finally have presets like we have workflow presets and other types of presets in the mirror window. There's a few new hotkeys, actually quite a few new ones, but I'm going to show them off over the course of this video. One is to toggle the X-ray waveforms. So I really like the X-ray waveforms, but I don't want to view them all the time. So this way I basically have them mapped to a key on my X-Keys controller, so I can simply toggle them on and off really fast. Another set of key commands that have been added are to basically capture in and out points. So I'm going to try to show you that. Let's say I have a selection here. I've hotkeyed this to Shift Command C, but you can put it to anything that you want. But basically now when I come down to a new file, if I hit Shift Command V, which is what I've set it to, I can paste that set of in and out points. Well, why would you want this? Let's say you have a set of split files that all represent the same recording. So maybe you have 10 different microphones from a car recording that are all in sync with each other, but they're not interleaved into one file. They're separate split mono files. If you were editing and you found a really nice piece of a rev, let's say, but you realize you wanted the exhaust mic, not the mic that you're looking at, you could simply copy that in point, come down here, let's say this was the other file, and paste it. And now you could spot that exact thing in sync. So this is a very handy thing to have. So that's copy and paste in and out point. There's a new view here available under the toolbar called brightness. And what brightness does is shows you in this little pill form sort of an overview of the frequency spectrum of a sound. So red are low frequency sounds, moving into orange for sort of mid frequency, and green are higher frequency. So if I play something like this songbird, right, it's a high frequency sound. If I play something like this, it should be a much lower frequency sound. And so on. Now, these don't build by themselves. You have to click on a file and eventually it will build that for you. Now, it only builds them if the sound file is of a certain volume. If it's a very, very quiet sound, it might not build it. And sometimes they do take time, but you can also select a bunch of files and under database, say build brightness for selected. And again, if you did this on 100,000 files, it's going to take a very long time. So probably best to just let your databases slowly build them as you click around. But if you wanted to make a selection and force it to build them, you can. This one is pretty neat. This is basically transcription. So I have here this text file, or not a text file, a spoken word file.
When the Vitaphone was in its laboratory.
And I use this file for just testing reverbs and things like that and setting levels for general dialogue chain. But if I wanted to take a section of this and basically transcribe that into text, I can now do that. Now this is evolving. This will probably change and get better. This is kind of a first pass on this, so don't expect this to sort of stay exactly the same. But what I can do is go under Edit, Transcribe Selection, and what you'll see happens
Then, but
is
envy
that it
now.
makes a marker first of all. So if I zoom in, you can see the text of this little section that I just copied.
I was greatly impressed with the device, but questioned its show value.
But the other thing it does is it puts that text in the clipboard. So I can come here and I can paste it right into, say, description. Now, there seems to be a little bug that when I paste that, I lose my marker down here that was made. I'm not quite sure why. It has to be a bug. I've tried even embedding the file first, and the markers are getting lost when I paste that here. It seems like maybe it's either or. I don't know exactly why. Hopefully, in the future, it'll keep those. But I'll just show you that without making any selection, if I run that transcribe selection, It's pretty fast, and it basically has made markers where every pause is. It's pretty good about realizing where the pauses are, and it's basically transcribed everything. Now, there's one other thing that's really neat related to markers, and if I go into the View menu, there's now a marker list, and that marker list will show you every marker that it made. So everything that it just transcribed, it basically broke it out. If I double
They
click,
plunged, staking everything, stopping at nothing.
I can basically just jump right to that place and play it.
I had lunch the other day with a well-known physicist, a man of...
Now you'll see there's a little tiny icon here of a man, and that man basically tells the marker list whether or not it should auto-scroll with you. So I'm going to shorten it like this. And when I have it static with the little man standing up, if I click across here and play something.
I had lunch the other day with a well-known...
Bravely, successfully, they plunged. I was greatly impressed.
You'll see that basically as I cross a marker, it does highlight it, but as it scrolls down off the screen, nothing happens. If I put this on and I click somewhere.
Warner Brothers, their efforts tolerated then but envied now, answered that question.
Basically, this window will auto-scroll to keep showing me whatever marker it passes in the window. You can also just resize this, of course, if you want to see all of them at once. And every time it passes a new marker, it will move the cursor down, which is quite convenient.
They put the show into the Vita.
I had lunch the other...
So this is going to be really handy for people doing dialogue, to be able to transcribe a dialogue take. I don't think you can do it in a batch form yet. That might come at some point. Maybe there'll be a new field for transcription, or I don't know exactly what this will hold, the future of this will hold, but it's going to be pretty cool. I'm excited for it just to be able to sort of take the beginning of a file that I might have slated out in the field and have it transcribe it into description to give me a jumping off point without having to sort of type it in myself. So that's transcription and the new changes to markers. Apparently you can change the transcription model. I'm not going to try to go into it now. You basically replace a file behind the scenes, and eventually I suppose that'll be written down somewhere how you do that. But I've found this one to be incredibly accurate so far, and so I wouldn't see any reason to change it anyway. A little thing, but bit depth has been added to advanced find. So bit depth is equal to 32. It won't find anything. Bit depth is equal to 24. So if I go to a database that has files, bit depth 24 finds everything because these are all 24-bit files. So you can now search your library for bit depth. This is particularly useful when you're converting your library to FLAC because 32-bit files can't be stored in FLAC. So you might want to do a search for all your 32-bit files and deal with them separately, for example. There's a feature in Soundminer 6 that's been there for a while, and it's called basically watched folders. And watched folders allows you to basically specify a folder that Soundminer will constantly look at for new files. A lot of people have been using this to try to sort of watch their entire database so that any new files added into those folders will suddenly appear. This isn't really what this was intended to do. This was really intended to use within a show scenario where you might have had like a single new design folder where a few people were designing sounds and putting them together, and a way to sort of have them auto added to a database. Justin, realizing that a lot of people were using it in a way that he hadn't really intended, has come up with something a little different. I'm going to go to this database here that has this file path for this one file. It's just in my calibration session. And there's a new button you'll see, and I just added it with under the toolbar. I'll get to that in a second, but it's called Scan Database Folders. What this button will do, it will go through every single path that it finds in your library and look for new files. When I push it, it should find things because I know there are other things in that Pro Tools Sessions audio file folder. And when I say sync to database, there they are. They all come in. And, you know, these are test tones and different things. They don't even have metadata, but you'll see that it found all of these files at this path, so it brought them in. And this will go through everything in your entire database. So if you have 20,000 folders, it'll scan them all, and it'll do it very, very fast, much faster than watched folders. The one caveat you have to be aware of here is that if you added a new folder, it will not scan it. So it only scans existing paths for new files. So if, for example, you built your whole library on a set of UCS folders, you'd be fine. Because if you added new files into any of them, they would be found by doing this scan databases. But if you bought a new library and you put it as a subfolder within, commercial libraries or something, then it wouldn't be scanned. You'll have to add that manually. But for people who have a set folder structure, this scan to databases will work very well. And again, this is meant sort of as not a replacement, but an alternative to watched folders for people who want to scan their entire database. But unlike watch folders, again, it doesn't sort of use a top-level folder and look for everything on every possible subpath and any added folders. It really just scans your existing folders in your database, so that's important to realize. I'm going to hide brightness for now, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to check some various files as we get ready for the next thing. One thing that's come back to Soundminer 6.1 that was in 5, I believe, but not in 6, is the ability to spot checked files directly to Pro Tools without having to sort of sort them first into a view. Normally, when you spot Pro Tools, it spots whatever is in your selection. But it is possible now to spot checked things directly, even if I have my cursor here or even if I have these selected. You can, in your key commands now, set up a hotkey to both spot checkmarked files and bring checkmarked files into your DAW. So I'm going to launch Pro Tools really quickly and show you how that works. I'm going to go up here under DAW and make sure that Pro Tools is selected. Wait for it to find my session. And now I've already set up a hotkey, and I picked something arbitrary, Shift-Option-K. But you see that I have these 3 files selected. If I'm correct, it will ignore those and it'll spot these other files. If I hold Shift-Option-K, there it goes. And there you go. It's spotted basically those files. Now, one thing that it's done is that it's unchecked those files after it spotted them. There is a preference, but at the moment it seems to be broken. But under Mark Tag, there's a check mark that says Toggle Auto Uncheck Marks after transferring. It's even off right now. So it shouldn't be unchecking them after transferring. This seems to be a bug. This was put in fairly recently. I'll alert Justin, but what it should do is with this on, it should basically clear the check marks after it spots, and with it off, it should not. But if I scroll down and pick a few other files, for example, hit Shift-Option-K, it'll spot those as well. And when I come back, it has unchecked them. So it seems like this is a bit of a bug, but hopefully it will work in the future. So just be aware of that. Toggle auto uncheck marks after transferring. Basically, whether or not you wanted to clear your check marks after you've transferred them into your DAW. One little thing that may affect some of you before, because of bugs in Pro Tools scripting language and their spotting API, if I had a selection made here in Pro Tools and I wanted to bring in a bunch of things like this into my bin using Command B, what would happen before in Soundminer 6 is that basically Soundminer would put the first file here and basically I think it would stop even transferring anything else into the bin. I'm going to go ahead and clear the region bin just so that we can check this. But now if I have a selection made and I bring into bin, my selection has been cleared and those things have been successfully brought into the bin. This is basically how Soundminer 5 behaved. Justin had to rewrite some of his programming to get around Pro Tools' terrible scripting API stuff, Spot API. So just be aware that if you had been seeing that annoying thing where you couldn't sort of bring into bin if you had a selection, now Soundminer will successfully clear the selection before bringing into the bin again. Let's look at Radium regions. So I'm going to go ahead and clear these for a second. If I want to define a Radium region, I can simply highlight a selection and hit R. I have mine colored bright red. And actually, before I go into the next thing, let me show you this too. This is now a preference under colors to choose the Radium region color. So you can actually change this now. So if I want to make them orange, I can make them orange. So that's quite a nice thing. But if I have some auto-identified regions down below, and I basically want to make those my Radium regions, well, there's two sort of options. What happened before was any Radium regions that existed up here would be retained, and it would just add these on top of it. If I hit Shift-R, basically you see I have like all these overlapping, doubling up regions. This wasn't always what you want, so I'm going to go ahead and clear all of those. I'm going to make a couple arbitrary ones again and then show you this new preference under Radium, which is clear old regions when capturing. And now, if I have auto-identified regions, and I want to basically make those my Radium regions, I hit Shift-R, and you'll see that it cleared all the old ones first, and then just made each one of these auto-identified into a Radium region. This just makes things a little tidier and prevents you from basically stacking Radium regions on top of each other so easily, which was something that happened a lot before. While I'm here, I'll just show you one other new Radium feature. We'll come back to Radium a little more, I'm sure, later. Now, it used to be that whenever you spotted into a slot, if you had Radium regions defined, they would always be loaded as Radium regions. So if I take this and I say load into sampler slot 1, basically you'll see that it loaded slot 1 as a set of Radium regions. Resize this a little bit so we can see it better. Okay. What you couldn't do before was drag a selection and try to spot. So I'm going to spot this into slot 2 with this selection made. And you'll see that it still spotted it as Radium regions. Basically, the rule was if Radium regions had been defined, Radium would always load those over a selection. There is now a preference under Radium to ignore Radium regions when a selection is made. And this is a super useful one. Now I have this selection. And if I now load this into sampler slot 2, it loads it as a single region that's instead of loading the Radium regions. So it's not even a region. It's just loaded as a piece of audio. And you can see the difference. This one loaded the Radium regions. This one loaded the selection. So you now have that choice. I would leave this on all the time, of course, now, because if I've made a selection, that's almost always what I actually want to spot into Radium. If not, I can just remove my selection and it will spot the Radium regions. So that's a super useful one. One change that's been made here to the monitoring matrix, if you're not using Soundminer Monitor, for example, let's say you have Soundminer going directly to your speakers through an audio interface, and let's say your speakers are not hooked up in SMPTE layout, which is LRC, LFE, LSRS, you now at least have another option if you've wired your room to be working in film layout, which is LCR, LSRS, LFE, which is basically Pro Tools internal layout. You now can choose that if you wanted to. Now, again, this only has an effect when you're not using the Soundminer monitor. And I realize you can't see that. I'll move it over a little bit and we'll try it again. I think you can see it now. You can choose basically the film output format. And again, it says when not using monitor. So it only has an effect when the Soundminer monitor is not being used. I don't know if this was in 6 or if this is new to 6.1, but I'll mention it. You can now tell Soundminer to connect to the monitor plugin on the launch. So if Pro Tools is automatically running and the monitor plugin is up and running, then leaving this on will basically tell Soundminer to always connect to it if it sees it running, which is probably what you want if you're going to use the monitor in the first place. As I mentioned, you can customize the toolbar. I don't know where that is, so I'm going to go to Help and type Toolbar. And it's under Layouts. So Layout, Customize Toolbar. This is where you can find that new one, for example, Scan Database folders. You can also change things around, change the order, and it goes live. You can see the toolbar changing right above that. Uses this new sort of selection dropdown that I really like. Oh, I want to show you one other thing. Let me bring back brightness again. You can actually sort by brightness, which is pretty cool. So if you wanted to sort your sounds low frequency to high frequency, you can do that. Now, a few of these kind of stragglers, I don't know why they didn't really follow the rules, but if I do it again, now they seem to have taken. So maybe you have to do it twice. Another thing that a lot of people use is the color field. So I'm going to turn brightness off. And I can't turn brightness off. Maybe I have to sort by something else. Okay. Now, colors have been there for a long time, but before, if you wanted to work with colors, what you had to do was open the workflows, and you had to go down here and you find set color, and you could set a color, and then you'd run a workflow, which was a little bit cumbersome. Now, you don't have to do that anymore. Now you can simply right-click over the color field and assign colors directly. So I can come down here and I can pick a bunch of files and make those green. I could make these orange. So you can assign colors directly from the sidebar. You can also remove them if you want to. Just hit remove down here and you could remove them. One other thing as well that you can sort by colors, just like you can brightness, which is pretty cool. So ascending or descending. You can also filter colors in the left panel. So I can go down here to color, even though it's spelled wrong with a U for some crazy Canadian reason. And I can basically select colors this way. And if I select the top, it's basically show me everything that doesn't have a color. So you can see nothing comes up. And you can add more than one. You can make multiple selections using the option key, or the command key. So I could find whatever. So this makes using colors just that much easier for those of us that use them. Great to do for making a to-do list. Maybe certain colors mean you haven't done the metadata yet, etc. Now you can do that. So I'm going to go ahead and select all these and remove these colors. And you'll see that this doesn't seem to update until maybe I do a command all. Even then, maybe I have to close it. I'm not sure. This seems to be stuck a little bit. If you clear everything from the browser, it seems to not do that. But if I go off and on again, yeah, I don't know. But anyway, you can, as you add things in color, the left panel should update. But it seems like it's not auto-updating, or it's retaining some that it shouldn't have anymore. But maybe that can get fixed. Okay. Let's look at one more thing related to markers, or a couple more things. I'm going to come down here in this file and I'm going to create some markers. And I'm going to just call them marker 1. And I'm going to create another one here. Marker 2. And let's just make here. Okay. Now you can see here, these markers are incredibly tiny. I can barely even read them. So a couple things that you can do. If you go to, I think, waveform, marker font height, you can basically increase this. So I can make it quite a bit bigger. And if I go to colors, I think you can actually, here, waveform marker background color. I can actually select, for example, gray. And now what I found is that this sometimes is a little iffy to sort of get it to trigger for some reason. But sometimes if I toggle off and toggle back, yeah, or hit command all, I don't know. Sometimes it doesn't sort of happen right away, but it will eventually happen. So yeah, I don't know why, but it will eventually highlight backgrounds basically for those at some point. And I don't know how it triggers. Maybe a restart of Soundminer is required for this one. There are certain color things that kind of require you to restart Soundminer. But in any case, you can adjust that as well. Now you can also create a region marker, I think. Here you go. So you can make a selection and say create region marker from selection. I'll call this region marker. That one took the gray background, so maybe it only applies to region length markers, actually, which would kind of make sense, I suppose. A single point marker doesn't really have a selection. So maybe that's what this color does here. Anyway. Now, to basically make a selection and play that back, what you do is you hit Option and you click it. That will start playback and it will highlight the selection for you. So you can have as many region markers as you want, I believe. Just call that 2. And there you go. So there's where you can see your region markers. And again, Option to highlight it and start playback. You can also just be aware, change the marker color. So if I wanted them to be yellow, not red, that's fine. You can change that as well. So you have a lot of control now over the markers, which is really nice. And we already saw the marker list as well. So one really cool thing that people have been asking for since tabs have been introduced is the ability to store sort of tab layouts. I'm going to clear all these colors out of here. And you now have tab layouts. So I have a tab layout stored that just has these 3 temporary databases for the purposes of these tutorials. So let me just show you if I duplicate a couple of tabs, and I'll go ahead and change some of the databases that some of them are looking at. And this one. I can now go under layout and I can sort of say save this tab layout, and I'm going to store this into 8. And I can also rename these layouts. So let me just rename that one really quickly. It's under layout and rename tab layout 8. And I'll just call this temp for whatever reason. Now if I go back under layout, recall tab layout, And here's the one that I made for this demo. And you'll see that it basically restores those 3 tabs exactly as they were with the databases that they were looking at. So it's here under layouts, basically store the tab layout, recall the tab layout, rename the tab layout. So you have 9, just like you have 9 layouts, you have now 9 tab layouts. And this is really handy if you're in a network environment. Maybe you have a set of network databases that you only want to call up when you're connected to the network. And maybe you have different projects have different databases and you want to have them sort of in tabs. You can now do that through here. So that's pretty cool. A couple more shortcuts. I'm going to actually call back this one for a second just so I have more tabs. Keyboard shortcut now to move between tabs left and right. So that's hotkey assignable in the key commands. If you go under change key commands, somewhere in there is next tab and previous tab. So I have them set to my little X keys controller. So I can quickly scroll across my tabs. So that's really handy. Another thing sort of tab related is that if I go over here to saved searches, and let's delete these just so we start with a clean slate. And let me do a search for for some geothermal sounds. And let's say I want to maybe save a search with this. So I come over here and I say, make a saved search. Well, you'll see this little button down here that says include the tab state in this search. So if I type geothermal and I save the tab state, now, for example, if I go back and I recall this other tab state, when I come over here to recall this saved search, basically the tab state came with it. So that's pretty cool. So you could, if you had a set of tabs, like I said, for a show, you could create a search of some kind, and you have to have an actual search term, I think, for this to work. But you could basically then have, that search recall all the tab states. So that's a new thing over here. I'm going to go back to Radium for a minute and show you a couple things. But first, I'm going to put my tabs back. Call up Radium. One thing that you can now do, let's say that I have, I realize my ring mod's been on this whole time, so everything I've been playing for you has been probably sounding very strange. Sorry about that. Any case, let's turn these off. Before, if you had the effects rack on, and let's say we have just a few things on, let's say phaser or something. If I loaded something into Radium from here, it would ignore these things. It would just be loading this direct sound file. I now actually have 2 abilities under Radium. One says process through the effects rack on load, and one says process through the DSP rack. So if I'm right, and I'm not going to even listen to this because I have my speakers muted so I don't get nasty feedback. If I load right now this sound file into slot 1, that should not be going through the effects rack unless I come down here and say process through the effects rack. Now I take that, load it into slot 1, and I hope. I guess we'll find out later when I go to edit this video if that worked. That sound should have some phaser quality to it at least, to some degree. Anyway, the same applies. You can send things through the DSP rack as well. So if I had a bunch of DSP plugins active, I can tell Soundminer to pass my audio through them on its way to be loaded into a Radium slot. I usually leave these off just because it's a little dangerous. But you do have those 2 new abilities there. Turn all these off so I don't screw myself up later. Now, Radium itself, the window mode has changed a little bit. It used to be that Soundminer and Radium would sometimes get a little confused as you clicked around. Radium might disappear, etc. So a couple new things here, pretty sort of minor but useful. One is that Soundminer will now, I'm going to do a search over here for something. No, search. Even when I'm clicked here on Radium, if I hit Command J, Radium will pass the key commands back to Soundminer. This wasn't the case before. If Radium was in the foreground, it sort of blocked all of the key commands for Soundminer. Now it will pass them through, and it even moves focus back over here, even though Radium is on top. Now, I think there's a preference. Yeah, you can have window, that's what will require me to restart, but you can change whether Radium always sort of floats on top or not. I like to keep it there. I have a, basically a key command to just hide it using an AppleScript thing, so I can just toggle it on and off when I want. One thing that Justin added in Soundminer 6 is sort of an auto-save folder for Radium, so that if you accidentally quit Soundminer, you wouldn't lose all of your Radium work. It would be sort of auto-saved in a patch. sort of anytime you made a change, I think maybe it even made a new version of that. Just one thing to note, that the location of that has changed now. I'm going to hide Radium for a second. And I'm going to open up my Soundminer support folder. And this is my Soundminer support folder. And if I click, is it in Radium? It must be. Yeah. Autosave patches. And what you'll see is this folder, autosave patches. And basically, you might see a bunch of files in there. Like if you quit Soundminer with things active in Radium, I think, I haven't saved or I haven't quit out with anything active, but it'll basically store certain patches there that you might be able to recover later if you accidentally sort of quit out of Soundminer, or maybe it crashed or something. You might be able to recover them by coming into here. If I go back to Radium for a second, and let's move it over. If I called up something like the TSE Surround, you'll see that the Radium meter up here has now changed into surround. This is new. It was always a stereo meter before, I think. Now it will sort of follow a little bit the mode that you're in. So turning on TSE Surround puts Radium into surround. And now you have metering that will kind of show you where the channels and what they're doing, which is nice. This is a little thing, but under grain, random length, which was sort of an addition that was added after the grain engine was built, wasn't a target before under the modulation section. Now it is. If I go here under grain engine, I can choose random length as a target for example, an LFO. Now you see it moving. So this is a small one, but it's very nice to have all of these available as targets for modulation sources. And I think that's it for changes in Radium. Not drastic changes there, but still a few really useful ones. So now let's look at some of the new things related to UCS. For those people who know what that is and who use it, there's some pretty cool new functions here in Soundminer. So UCS, around the time that 6.1 is going to be released, I'm going to release the final version of UCS, I hope. 8.2.1. Now, there have been no changes, no added categories or anything like that. I'm still not adding any more categories, but one thing that we found was a typo, unfortunately. And so we wanted to fix that. So that's fixed in this tiny 0.1 update. And also, I've been spending a lot of time, months, sort of going through the synonyms list and drastically improving it. I think we've gone from about 4,000 synonyms to the categories to almost 15,000 now. And you'll see that in certain tools, for example, Audio Category Clipper, Soundminer, which uses the synonyms, this little crazy Alfred tool that I built, which basically, let's see if I can get it to work. There we go. If I type that, this little Alfred tool that I built will basically search the synonyms. So if I search for something like tiger, again, it knows that, animals, wildcat is what I want. And if I hit return at this point, it'll copy the category ID to the clipboard. But I've increased the synonym count a lot, as I said. So now I type, for example, blockhouse, and it knows that that's a synonym for prison. And you can even start to see all of these things: arrest, attica, solitary, stockade, warden, warder. So the synonym list has just grown a lot. And for the most part, what you'll find is that the tools that use it are just going to get that much better at sort of recommending things to you. There's another use of the synonym list I'm going to show you in just a second. But that's all to say that 8.2.1 will get released pretty much the same time as Soundminer 6.1, I hope. The way to check that you're using the right list is, I'm going to go back over here. If you go to something like category full and start to type wood handle, what you should see is this wood HNDL. That's the correct category ID for that. There was a typo before. It had wood HANDL, but because there's lots of handling categories and they're all HNDL, I wanted to fix this. So apologies if you've already used this category. You might just want to do a quick search for it. Maybe change the cat IDs on your file names. Probably not a category that's been used that much anyway. So, okay, that's enough of that. So Soundminer 6.1 should load the 8.2.1 list. Search for wood handle is a good way to check. But the other benefit of the synonyms, and something else Justin's been working on that's pretty cool, is suggestions for categories. So a lot of people just don't really know where something should be categorized. And you can look up one by one, like I just showed you. I can come over here and go, okay, this is a fumarole. So I can type fumarole and I go, oh, okay, great. So it's a fumarole, and I can select something like that. But you'll see here, there's this new possible field, and I have it showing. You can turn it on and on here. It's called UCS suggestions. And what this allows you to do is basically tell Soundminer to offer you some suggestions. Well, how is it doing that? What it's doing actually is to read the description. It's not basically using the sound file. We're not quite that far with AI things yet and all of that, but it's taking whatever's in the description. So the better your metadata, the better this will work. And it's using a couple different ways to try to suggest UCS categories. One is basically by comparing all of these words to the synonyms list. And okay, fumarole, if it finds that, it might suggest that category because it's sort of, hey, there's a match. It would also be looking at steam, I suppose, and hissy and all of these things. So it's not always going to get it right, but it's going to do its best guess. So what I can do is I can right-click on a file, and I can go to a process script. So I hit execute script, and you'll see there are some new ones down here. Well, let's just start with the first one, and that's synonym lookup. So if I click that, basically Soundminer takes the description, compares it to the synonyms list, and it starts to offer me a bunch of suggestions. And you'll see that down here along the bottom, I get a bunch of suggestions as well. They're just mirror of those. And you'll see that they say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These don't respond to keys yet, but what you can do is go under Edit, Change Key Commands, scroll down here to Assign UCS Suggestion 1. That would be this one. And you can set key commands. So what I've done on my little X keys controller is that I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 set to pick these things. So if I want to assign this record to geothermal fumarole, there's a few ways I can do it. I can just click the button and it will basically assign that record to that cat ID. It fills in all those fields and it clears the suggestions. I can choose it down here as well. Or I can use my hotkey. So with my mouse nowhere near it, I can push the hotkey that I've assigned for Assign UCS Suggestion 1, and it'll assign it that way as well. Well, let's say I want to pick, a few records, and I'm going to re-execute that script, telling it to use the synonyms, and now you'll see wow, there's a lot of stuff here. For each record, it's gone through and it's done its best to assign it. So here's an example. Anemone geyser erupts. Well, it got it right, but it's in the third position. So I don't know why it designed boom. There's something here, constant low energy. That's what makes sense. But in any case, I could go through these records and I could say, okay, this is basically 1. I could go to here and say, oh, this is 3. I could go here. This is a geyser, so I know that's 2. And I can assign things this way. I can also make multiple assignments if I wanted. Let's say for some reason I want to call all of these designed rhythmic. If I hold down Command and press that, it basically sets all of those records to that suggestion and then clears the suggestions. So I hope that makes sense. So if you basically ever click on a record, even if you're not scrolled there and you see all of these, that's where they came from. They won't show up until you basically ask for them. But if you really don't want them anymore and you don't want to select them, you can also right-click on those records, execute script, and you can say UCS synonyms clear. Now, in addition to the synonyms, I'm going to clear these as well. So let's start over. In addition to just having it compare synonyms, there is also an AI lookup, basically. So I'm going to select a few random ones. And I'm going to right-click and I'm going to say execute script UCS AI lookup. Now, this is a bit different. This is Justin doing some pretty clever coding and using language models and all kinds of things to try to suggest things as well. It's not using the synonym list. It's using other things. Now, because these sounds, some of my sound libraries were used to help train all of this, it's going to be very good at this probably. His AI model should get all of these pretty close. Actually, this one got wrong. But you see that it basically didn't give me a lot of different suggestions either. It kind of said, nope, that's what that is. So we'll see. This is basically a coyote call, so a dog. So that's fine. Maybe it should be wild dog instead of dog, but whistle mechanical. This is actually a bird call, so maybe I would not agree with this one. But this is a geyser for sure, so I could choose that one. And this is definitely a door, an antique door from a ghost town. So you can see that AI suggests a lot less for some reason. Now, it didn't used to do that. It used to suggest more. So this is an evolving thing as well again. And as this sort of AI or machine learning is trained on a lot more good sounds, it'll just get better and better and better. So this is definitely an emerging technology for now. There's one last one, which is basically a combination of the AI and synonyms lookup. So I'm going to choose one last one and show you execute script AI synonym lookup. This will basically do the best of both. It will go through Justin's AI lookup and it'll compare to my synonym list. And it'll basically give us lots of suggestions. And you'll see that it basically gives us, I think, up to 9 in this case. So we get a lot. So this is usually what I run if I have the time, but it takes quite a bit longer. So actually, a lot of times I just try the synonym list first. I found it pretty good. Adding in Justin's AI thing makes it better for sure. And but that's UCS suggestions. Now, one other thing to note is that you can see this becomes a pretty long string of text. If you know the UCS system really well, you can also go under Layout, UCS Suggestions, and tell it to use the cat IDs, which are much shorter. And you can see it's the same categories, but it's just showing you the cat ID version of them. So like for me, who knows, these inside and out, I can read these just as fast as I can read the category full. So this is my usually mode of working, but you have both options for how to view these suggestions. Okay, let's clear all of those. So we don't need them anymore. Let's go back to workflows for a second to talk about a couple of things here. Now, I use workflows all the time. It's one of the best features of Soundminer, in my opinion. I couldn't live without it at this point. But what happens a lot is I'll build this workflow, this really elaborate thing, whatever. And now I want to do something completely different. Well, what I have to do at this point is save this as a preset. Then I can clear it. Then I can rebuild this other one. And it's like, then if I want to go back to the other one, then I have to save this as a preset. Then I can come over here and select a different one. But what you can do now, which is pretty cool, is let's just say I've made this amazing workflow and I want to make another workflow. Well, there's a new button up here, new tab. We now have tabs in the workflow, which is pretty amazing. So now I could basically set up as many sort of separate workflows to do complicated things as I need. And I can toggle back and forth between them. Now, one thing you can't do as of now is you can't rename this. They're just going to be called tab 1 and tab 2. One thing I've been starting to think about doing is to just put a comment at the top of each one. This workflow does X, right? If I can type. And maybe under this one, I put a comment that this workflow does Y, whatever. So that as I'm toggling between them, I could sort of you could almost give it a name here if you wanted to. You can add as many tabs as you want from what I can tell. I don't seem to see a limit. It started out with 4, but now it seems like add as many as you want. You can, under File, import and export the tab sets. So I can export this entire set of tabs that I could then re-import later. These will be retained even if I don't do anything. If I quit Soundminer right now and relaunched it, it will remember all of these. So I don't necessarily feel the need to export it, but I would lose them potentially if I accidentally, for example, right-clicked and said close all tabs. You get a little warning, but if you just click OK, then basically your tabs would be lost, right? So you might want to export them. If you really built a whole series of tabs that you knew you were going to use all the time, just export a safety copy. One really little thing, but one that's super helpful to me is you can now rename a workflow without having to resave it. So before, what you had to do if I wanted to make a change to this workflow and I wanted to update it, I'd have to do a save as and then basically come back here and erase the original one. Now I can come under File and say rename the preset, and I could rename it right here, which is super useful. One thing that I'm not going to show you because I don't have anything set up to show you, but Soundminer will now recognize the extensions .m and .s, even if they're on separate files. If they have the rest of the file name is the same, Soundminer will now recognize that that's an MS pair. I don't know why you would name your files that way in split mono format, because .m would get very confused as the mono file. Maybe that's your reason. Maybe you want to store it that way, so you know that you could just grab that mono file. Soundminer will now, in any case, pair those two together like it does a .l and a .r file if they're split mono, and call them an MS pair. So that's something that's new. Just be aware of that. If you name a file .m and a file .s, if the rest of the file name is the same, Soundminer is going to consider those an MS pair. Soundminer has had, for all the time that I've known it, this altered sound label. Basically, if a file is modified in Soundminer, basically when you transfer this file into your DAW, if you've made a modification through something like the DSP rack, or if you pitched it down or something like that, it would add this MOD suffix, which is very useful. But what it didn't do before was if you had the effects rack on and you had something on, it didn't actually add that mod flag, but it does now. If the effects rack is active and if there's anything active in it, your transferred file will get that mod flag. And I can just show you really quickly by spotting something. And there you go. You can see the flag. MOD has been added to the end of it. So that's very nice because it's super useful to know in Soundminer or in Pro Tools, that the file you're looking at is a modified version, not the original file. So that's really important that that's been changed. If you use skip silence, which is down here under the hammer and wrench, which I always leave on, basically Soundminer will attempt to detect a big chunk of silence at the head of a file. I don't think any of my files are going to have that right now, but if they did, Soundminer would try to skip it when it plays. And I will just say that it's gotten better. Soundminer has improved these skip silence algorithms or whatever it's doing to detect silence better. So if you've tried it in the past and haven't been sort of thrilled with how it worked, try it again because it's definitely much improved now. If you work in FLAC, under the librarian menu, strip metadata from audio files will now also strip metadata out of FLAC files. I believe in Soundminer 6 it wouldn't. It would strip out of WAV files, but not FLAC. Now it will destructively remove things out of FLAC files, so be careful if you would ever use this, but it will work on FLAC and WAV, I believe now. One more thing over here in the left panel. If you go to playlists, you can see there are folders in the playlist. So that's pretty cool. So I have some folders here, some playlists rather. I will kind of reorder them a bit, and I can recall them by double clicking, or I can click on the arrows next to them, and I can pull them in and out of folders however I want. I can make multiple folders. And if I right click somewhere, I can basically tell it to sort, which will sort the playlists in the folder in alphabetical order. I don't think I can nest. Oh, look at that. I can even nest folders in folders, which is pretty cool. So people who use playlists a lot now have this ability to create folders and apparently subfolders. There's an auto lock button, which I don't know if this was there before, but in case it wasn't, I'll just show it. Basically, with auto lock off, if I hit Command All or Command J, to show all, no matter what playlist I'm looking at, it just sort of clears the playlist and shows me everything. But if I turn on auto lock and then recall a playlist, now if I did a search for a rodent, which should only find one file, now if I hit Command J, it basically only takes me back as far as that playlist. It's locked that set of files, and I have to turn off auto lock. So even hit Command J as many times as I want, it's basically going to only show me that playlist until I turn that off. And even after turning it off, I found hitting Command J doesn't seem to work for a moment until you call up another playlist and then hit Command J. So slightly buggy when you come out of auto lock mode. Just be aware that you have to sort of switch to something else and then hit Command J. Let's see. We're getting there. Let's see what else we've got. This has been a change or an addition to sort of keywords, which is kind of fun. I'm going to try to call up keywords, which is here. And actually put them on the left side, which is fine. As you hover over a keyword, what you'll find is that it kind of takes on an underline there. And if you actually double click it, if I double click, for example, bird, it makes bird into a search term. Basically, it searches on whatever I clicked. If I double click fantasy, now it's searching for fantasy. If I click hunting call, now it's doing hunting call. I'm showing off a library that's not yet released, but someday this library will be released. Geez, I'm showing everything off that I shouldn't show off. But yes, so basically I can double click Philippines and here's all the records that come up as Philippines in this little temp database. So you can also option click. You can also option click on one of these to quickly call it up as well. And if you open up the right panel and go to metadata, if I find keywords here, there it is. I can also just click. I don't even have to option click here. I can just click. So if I hit eruption, it should call up all of those files. So that's a pretty neat way to use keywords as a way to search your library. I'm going to open up the spotting panel to show you this. Next one is a very small change, but it's pretty useful. I have a folder here called Untitled. Before, you'd have to try to sort of hit, I can't remember, it was Command R or something. Now, Command Return will basically play a file. So if I'm here, command return will play this, and option return will let you rename it. So if I'm on the folder, if I hit option return, I can now rename. I can also rename basically files here, or items. I won't say files because it's not changing the file name, but it is changing the sort of spotting list name, or the record name, I suppose. I don't know how you call it. But if I take this and I switch it over here into database view, and then I call up the file names, you'll see that it didn't change any of the file names, but it did actually change the record name, which I guess is good and bad. I don't know. I would typically leave this on the file names, I would think, but you can actually rename these now. Maybe you could do before, but just remember that command return will play the file, and option return will rename the file. So those are a couple shortcuts that have been changed. I think that's just about it. One last thing I'll sort of show off, and I'm only going to hint at it because it's something that's very new, and I don't know when it will be completely useful and all that. But if you look under the general preferences, you'll see something down here that some people will be pretty excited about, and it says receive OSC. OSC is sort of a replacement or an alternative to MIDI. It stands for Open Sound Control. It's going to be a way that basically every function in Radium, or nearly every function, will be available to be controlled through OSC. And it allows you to build very simple and relatively quick touchscreen controllers on things like an iPad or a phone. It's quite a powerful protocol, and Soundminer is going to support it. It's built in now. It's sort of working. I don't know if everything has been exposed or every command is available. I don't have a list of the commands yet that you can use, but some people have definitely been poking around in there and having some success. So this is one of those watch this space kind of things, I guess. But this will open up a lot of possibilities in the future. And there are ways to convert MIDI and different things into OSC. So hopefully, it will allow us to build some pretty powerful Radium controllers, which is something that gets me very happy. I think that covers everything that I wanted to cover. I'm sure I've forgotten something. I'm sure I've skipped a few things. There's massive sets of release notes for every beta version of 6.1 that's come out, of things that have changed and things. But these are the main things that I wanted to show off. And so I don't know when 6.1 is going to be released. Pretty soon. I'm actually making this video a little bit before. I think it's going to be released in the next couple of weeks. Possible Justin will add something in there that I didn't cover here now. But he assures me that this is pretty stable now, what 6.1 is going to contain. So I hope this video is useful. Again, if you're interested in seeing the other things I'm up to, please head over to sonofex.com. You can see more tutorials, my sound libraries, a podcast, a blog, some little artwork stuff. There's some stuff over there that's worth checking out. So I hope everybody's well. Take care, and we'll see you at some point with Soundminer 6.2, I suppose.